Before we dive into these scary stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button if you enjoy true horror content every week. I've been a night shift security guard for about 3 years now. It's not a job most people would want, but I've always enjoyed the quiet hours. Sitting alone in the control room, watching the security monitors, it's not exactly exciting, but it's easy money. The building I guard is an office complex, 5 floors mostly empty after 7 p.m. The only people who stay late are the occasional overworked office people, but they're usually out by 10. After that, it's just me and the cameras. The night of the incident started off like any other. I did my rounds at 11 p.m., walking through the empty halls, checking doors, making sure everything was locked up. Nothing unusual. When I got back to the control room, I sat down and started flipping through the security feeds. The monitors are old, grainy, black and white screens, the kind you'd see in some low-budget horror movie. I'd been asking my boss for a new security system with better cameras, but he said it was out of their budget at the moment, and other things took priority. Most of the cameras show the same thing: empty offices, dark hallways, and the parking lot outside. But as I switched to the feed for the 3rd floor hallway, I noticed something strange. There was someone standing there. At first, I thought it was just a glitch. The feed on that camera had been acting up lately, and I figured it was just some weird distortion. But as I leaned closer, I realized it wasn't a glitch. There was a figure standing at the far end of the hallway, just outside the frame of the light. I couldn't make out any details. It was just a dark silhouette. I frowned and picked up the intercom mic. "Hello? Is someone up there?" No response. I switched to another camera that covered the same hallway from a different angle. The figure wasn't there. But when I switched back to the first camera, it was still standing there, completely still. I was confused, so I grabbed my flashlight and headed up to the 3rd floor. I wasn't exactly eager to go up there, but it was my job to check it out. The elevator ride felt like it took forever. When the doors finally slid open, I stepped out into the hallway. It was empty. I walked slowly down the hall, shining my flashlight into every corner. There was nothing out of the ordinary. I made my way to the spot where the figure had been standing on the monitor. It was just an empty stretch of carpeted floor. No signs of anyone being there. So I decided I'd headed back to the control room, feeling uneasy, but telling myself it had to have been some kind of glitch. But when I sat down at the monitors again, my heart nearly stopped. The figure was still there. It hadn't moved. It was still standing at the end of the hallway, in the exact same spot I had just checked. I just stared at the screen. I couldn't explain it. I had just been there. That hallway was empty. I picked up the intercom again. "If someone is up there, you need to leave. The police will be called if you don't comply." No response. I kept watching the screen, waiting for the figure to move, to do anything, but it didn't. Not a single muscle. It just stood there looking at the camera. I switched to every camera I had in the building, trying to see if I could catch it from another angle. But no matter which feed I looked at, the figure only appeared on that one camera. I stayed in the control room for the rest of my shift, too unnerved to go back up there. I kept glancing at the monitor, half expecting the figure to disappear or move, but it never did. Finally, my shift ended, and I left the building as fast as I could. My car was parked near the main entrance, and as I slid into the driver's seat, I glanced back at the office windows out of habit. That's when I saw it. On the 5th floor, in one of the windows, the figure was there, standing perfectly still. I stared at it, unable to look away. It wasn't moving. It was just watching me. I don't know how long I sat there frozen, staring back at it. But eventually I started my car and drove away. I never saw the figure again. Not on the cameras, not in the building, not in the windows. I still work there, and I often think about that night. Maybe it was just a glitch. But if it was a glitch, then who the hell did I see in the window as I was driving away? I work the night shift at a warehouse on the outskirts of my town. It's not exactly glamorous, but it pays the bills. My job is straightforward: pack boxes, move pallets, and make sure everything is ready for the day crew. Most of the time, I'm alone, with only the hum of the overhead lights and the whirring of the forklifts to keep me company. That night, it was quiet as usual. The warehouse is massive, with rows upon rows of metal shelves stacked high with products. The only light in the building came from the rows of lights that buzzed overhead, leaving the far corners of the warehouse shrouded in shadows. I was halfway through my shift, organizing a pallet of supplies near the back wall, when I felt it. The unmistakable sensation of being watched. You probably know what I'm talking about. I stopped what I was doing and glanced around. Nothing. Just empty aisles stretching out in every direction. I told myself it was just paranoia. It wasn't the first time I'd felt uneasy working alone at night, but the feeling was stronger this time. I went back to stacking boxes, trying to forget about it. That was when I heard a quiet sound coming from one of the aisles nearby. It wasn't a usual warehouse noise like the creak of shelves or the clatter of a loose pallet. This was different. It was footsteps. I froze. My heart started to race. No one else was supposed to be here. The building was locked up tight at night, and I hadn't seen anyone else since I arrived. I grabbed my flashlight from my cart and shined it down the aisle, illuminating row after row of neatly stacked shelves. There was nothing to be seen. I took a deep breath and told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe it was just some animal that had somehow gotten inside, a raccoon or a rat. But as I turned back to my work, I saw something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow walking across the far end of the aisle. "Hey, who's there?" I shouted. I got no response. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and started walking toward where I'd seen the shadow. My boots echoed on the concrete floor, so whoever it was, they definitely knew I was coming. I turned the corner and shined the flashlight down the next aisle. Empty. I stood there for a moment, trying to convince myself I was seeing things. But then I heard it again, faint footsteps, as if someone was trying to sneak around me. I whipped around, shining the flashlight in the direction of the sound. And there he was. A man was standing at the end of the aisle, half hidden in the shadows, wearing dirty, ragged clothes. His face was partially obscured, but I could see his eyes. He didn't blink and looked directly at me. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" I demanded. I was starting to be afraid. I wasn't exactly a big guy, and I'd never been in a fight before. He didn't answer. He just stood there staring at me. I took a step back, and as I did, he took a step forward. "Look, I don't want any trouble," I said. "I'll call the police if you don't leave." He said nothing. I turned slowly and started walking quickly toward the front of the warehouse. I glanced over my shoulder and my stomach dropped. He was following me. Not running, not hurrying, just walking, keeping the same slow pace, his eyes locked on me the entire time. It was getting too weird and creepy for me. I was starting to fear for what could happen, so I began to sprint. I could hear his footsteps behind me, steady and unhurried, as if he knew I couldn't outrun him. I reached the main office at the front of the warehouse and slammed the door shut behind me, locking it and grabbing my phone from the desk. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial 911. As I waited for the operator to answer, I heard a soft knock on the office door. The operator answered, and I stammered out my situation, telling them there was an intruder in the warehouse. They assured me officers were on their way, but every second felt like an eternity. I walked over and pressed my ear to the door, straining to hear anything outside. The silence was deafening. And then, just as the sound of sirens could be heard in the far distance, I heard his voice again. He wasn't outside the door anymore, he was somewhere further in the warehouse. He yelled in the most creepy and deep voice, "I'll see you soon." When the police arrived, they searched the entire building but found no sign of the man. No footprints, no evidence that anyone had been there at all. When my boss got in an hour or so later, the cops were still there. They checked the surveillance, and sure enough, they saw the man following me slowly. They saw him outside the door when I was in the main office. He looked to have what appeared to be a large knife in his pocket, but it was hard to tell because of the resolution of the cameras. When he walked away, he went into the shadows where the surveillance could no longer see him because it was too dark, and that was the last time we saw him. We had no idea how he got out or if he got out. But it was safe to say that I quit the job the next morning. I no longer felt safe being there alone at night. It was my turn to close up the office, a soulless cubicle maze tucked into the 5th floor of a downtown building. I didn't mind turning off the lights, locking up, and ensuring everything was in order before leaving. It was peaceful in a way. But tonight felt different. It was just me and the sounds of an empty building. I had stayed later than I intended, finishing up a report that was due first thing in the morning. The last of my coworkers had left hours ago, leaving me to enjoy the silence. Or so I thought. At around 10 p.m., as I was shutting down my computer, I heard something. It wasn't loud, just a faint sound drifting through the quiet office space. At first I thought it was my imagination or maybe some sound from the street outside. But the office windows were sealed tight, and I had grown accustomed to the muffled noises of the city. This was different. It came from inside the building. I paused my work to listen, but there was only silence. I shook my head and chalked it up to exhaustion. I grabbed my bag and started walking toward the main doors. But as I walked through the rows of empty cubicles, I heard it again. A whisper, soft and low, coming from somewhere above me. It was faint, almost like someone speaking just under their breath. My eyes instinctively looked at the ceiling vents. The office had a labyrinth of ducts that snaked through the building, pumping stale air into the cubicles. The whispers seemed to come from there. I laughed nervously. Maybe the wind outside were the cause of the noises in the vents. It wasn't uncommon for HVAC systems to groan or hiss when the temperature changed or a wind came through. But a whisper? It happened again. It wasn't mechanical. I was sure now it was a voice. "Hello?" I called, but no one replied. I should have left right then and there, but something kept me rooted in place. Against my better judgment, I found myself walking around the office looking at the vents. It seemed to be coming from the far corner of the office near the break room. I grew more nervous as I passed row after row of empty desks. When I reached the break room, I stopped. The vent above the coffee machine stared down at me. I stood there for a moment, straining to hear anything over the rush of blood in my ears. And then suddenly someone said, "Why are you still here?" The voice was clear now, soft, almost gentle, but unmistakably human. I staggered back, shocked. The voice had come from the vent, but there was no way anyone could be up there. The ducts were far too small for a person to crawl through. I grabbed a broom from the corner and used the handle to jab at the vent cover. It rattled slightly but didn't budge. "Who's up there?" I yelled. No response. Just silence. I waited a few seconds longer before turning to leave. My eyes were locked on the vent. But as I took a step away, the voice returned, louder. "Don't leave." I felt panic rising inside me. This time, the voice wasn't coming from the break room vent. It was coming from the vent behind me, the one over the cubicles I had just walked past. I spun around, gripping the broom tightly. My mind raced with explanations, each more absurd than the last. Maybe it was a prank, some late-night maintenance worker messing with me. But how would they know where I was? And how could they fit into the vents? I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on the vents above me. Every few steps I would glance at the next vent, expecting to see or hear something. And then I heard it again, this time directly above me. "Stay here with me forever." I ran. I didn't care about shutting off the lights or locking the doors. My bag thumped against my back as I ran for the elevator. When the doors opened, I jumped inside and hammered the button for the ground floor. Just before the doors closed completely, I saw a person in the far end of the office. I didn't recognize them. As the elevator descended, I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things. Stress, lack of sleep, there had to be a rational explanation. But then, just as the elevator doors were about to open, I heard it again, faint but clear. "Come back." The voice echoed through the vents, following me all the way to the ground floor. When I ran out of the building and into the cool night air, I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I sped out of the parking lot without looking back. After that encounter, I no longer want to stay late. I didn't feel safe anymore. I'm now one of the first to leave when work is over. I tried to talk to one of my colleagues about it, but he thought I was joking with him. It was then I realized that it's best if I just don't talk about it at work. I don't want the others to think I'm crazy or end up losing my job.